Hello, I'm Rebecca the Maths Lady, and welcome to this video which is all about the third decimal place. In this video we're going to cover how we teach children to visualise numbers to three decimal places on the number line, and we'll also teach them how to represent numbers to three decimal places with different types of base 10 apparatus. I'll also explain about teaching calculating with numbers to three decimal places. That's addition, subtraction, multiplication, division, and we'll briefly cover multiplying and dividing by 10 and 100. So if you don't need this video, here's your skip link to the next one, which is all about rounding to whole numbers and to different numbers of decimal places. Now in this video, I am assuming that you and the children that you're teaching already have some experience on working with numbers up to two decimal places. So if you need to watch the video on that, here's a link to it now. Okay, let's get started. So if I'm teaching a class, I would generally start working with my counting stick on the decimals side, and I would say to my children, this is 0 and this is 1. Can you show me 0.238? Or something like that? And I'd ask them just to sit in silence and think about it. I'd have the number written on the board, 0.238, and then I'd ask them to chat in pairs. And finally, I'd ask children to come out and start pointing to where they think 0.238 is, and asking the other children whether they agree or disagree, and starting a discussion. So we'd expect the 0.2 is here, 0.23 is here, and these sections are hundredths, so a thousandth is going to be one of these sections cut into 10 parts, and therefore 0.238 is going to be just below 0.24. It's going to be about here. I then make sure the children have some decimal number lines. There's a worksheet you can download from all the usual places. In my Expert Primary Maths Teaching Facebook group, you can find it there, or go to my website, and here's the website for that now, and there you can find all the information about the worksheets. So the decimal number line worksheet is perfect if you're working just with one or two children, and it's also great for full classes because you can set them a decimal number. Let's say this number is 2, this number is 3, and I want you to show me 2.509. 2.509. If that's 2 and that's 3, where would 2.509 be? Then the children can work individually, mark it on the sheet, and they have to talk about going 2.5. It's 9 parts out of 10 of this little distance here. So what we're getting to here is that the first number after the decimal point is your number of tenths, and there are your tenths on the number line. The second number after the decimal point is the hundredths, which are the smaller sections. The third section is your thousandths, which are tiny, and 10 of those fit into each section. You might have an interactive number line where you can zoom in and zoom out, and they can be wonderful. But children need to begin to be able to describe things that are in their imagination, even if they can't draw them precisely because they're too detailed. Otherwise, how are they going to get to the fourth decimal place? It's important to start to make that transition from being able to see everything in detail to being able to use precise language to describe what's going on. Right, now let's get started with base 10 apparatus. And you can do decimal numbers to three decimal places with Dienes if you consider a block like this to be 1 unit. Now that's quite a shift because until now we've always been using one small cube as being 1. So this has been 1,000. So we need to take time to make that shift. If this is 1, what would 0.2 be? If that's a bit difficult, what would 0.1 be? Well, it needs to be 1/10 of this block. What would that look like? Pause. Let your children think. Let them think individually and then share their thoughts in pairs so every child is articulating their thinking, and then come back to the group. And after a bit of discussion, you should come up with the idea that this is 0.1 or 1/10 of that. And you can put 10 of them together to build this cube. So 0.2 would be that much. What about 0.23? We're going to need some hundredths of this. What do they look like? Again, children need to think and pause, and every child needs the chance to articulate and develop their thinking and have a conversation about their own ideas. Essentially, 1/100th of a cube is going to be one of these. So 0.23 is going to be that much. And if they've done any work with decimal numbers in squares, they should be able to link, if we just look end on at the cubes, that should make sense, as these being the tenths and these being the hundredths. But we've moved into 3 dimensions, ready to cope with the 3rd decimal place. 0.237. What's that going to look like? If this is 1, what's 0.237? Think in your own head. As a teacher, you must always pause for much longer than you think you need to pause for. And then let children articulate their thoughts. If you're working one-to-one with children, obviously they can just talk to you. If you're not, for every child to articulate their thoughts, they need to talk with their talk partners or in small groups. And hopefully they'll puzzle out that the thousandths are single small blocks, because 1,000 of them make one of these blocks. And in doing that, they're doing so much great maths that consolidates all their previous work with Dienes apparatus and their understanding of it. And so 0.237 becomes this much. I have my 2 flats, my 3 rods, and 7 individual blocks here. That's 0.237. Now, some teaching schemes start with this, and when they do, I find that children struggle because they're having to make the shift from this having always been 1 to this suddenly being 1, and they're trying to learn about decimal numbers at the same time. So it's much better to start with the number line representation. It's much more accessible, and then have a go at this to consolidate that. They're much more likely to understand this if they've already seen it on the number line. And if they're struggling, you can make the direct links to how big each of these are by doing the same number with the number line as with the blocks and showing how each of the parts fit onto that number line. If that's too abstract, we can always go back to the Dienes, the same number. How many 1,000ths are there in this whole number, 0.237? And hopefully they can look at these individual blocks and puzzle out that there are 237 of them in the whole number. So the essence of this is that we want children to be able to see that a number like 0.237 is 2 tenths, add 3 100ths, add 7 1,000ths, but it's also 237 1,000ths. And we'd love them to be able to play around with other ideas, like it being 23 100ths and 7,000ths. And if they need a bit more help to get their heads around that, we can go back to the number line if that's what they prefer. And we could map out 0.237 and count up the thousandths by discussion, even if they're a bit small to count individually. By reasoning and discussing those ideas with children, we should be able to get there, especially if you use the methods that I recommended when working on 1 and 2 decimal places, which lay the foundations for this so clearly. So what else do we need to do with children while we're working on 3 decimal places? Well, they need to do some calculations. I've got a worksheet here in all the usual places for worksheets that gives them some addition, subtraction, multiplication and division questions. And of course they are going to need to exchange. That was the purpose of getting children to exchange just when we're focusing on the numbers, and exchange a 100th for 10,000ths, because they need to do exactly that when they're working on these methods. And it's nicer to focus on it clearly before you have to focus on the method and doing that together at the same time. If a child struggles with any of these, hopefully it's just useful practice and consolidation, but if they're struggling, find out what they're struggling with, zone in on that and really work on it. So you might want to go back to the videos on column addition, column subtraction, short multiplication or short division if a child is struggling with one of those methods. And then there's a second worksheet where the calculations are not set up, but there's some squared paper for your students to set up those calculations, and then you can concentrate on the detail. Are they aligning the decimal points in vertical columns and so on? And if they are getting anything wrong, it should become obvious as they work on these exercises. The final bit of work on this topic is on multiplying and dividing by 10 and 100. I already did a video on that when we'd worked to 2 decimal places. It's just the same ideas, so I'll just give you a link to that video now. If you've done that part of teaching and you've done your work on 3 decimal places, then repeating that topic but including numbers to 3 decimal places should be quite straightforward. If it's not, pay plenty of detailed attention to zoning in on exactly what the child you're working with is struggling with. And if you've got any problems still, please post your questions in the comments below. I love feedback. I love to know what your children are struggling with so that I can help. Bit of extension work. Can your children reify these calculations? Can they make up stories that would give them context and bring them to life? They don't have to be realistic, they can be fun, but they need to be imaginable. Can they make up subtraction questions that are about both finding the difference and about taking away? And in division, can they come up with division questions that are about sharing fairly, but can they also come up with questions that are about counting groups? And that's a real challenge. So your takeaways from this video: when you're introducing the 3rd decimal place, it's really important to work with the number line. Even if you can't set up the detail of the 3rd decimal place on a number line, it's a great basis for having a conversation that's going to bring every child's thinking to life, so you can see if they deeply understand what's going on or not and work with them. Once you've done that, play around with some base 10 apparatus, whether that's Dienes or place value counters. And if children are struggling to imagine place value counters and what's going on with them, make the link back to the Dienes or to the number line. And make sure they start exchanging before you move on to expecting them to be able to do that in calculation. They need to have thought about the idea that 10 1,000ths are 100th. These things are not obvious until you've had time to think about them and play with them, either on the number line or with Dienes apparatus. And it's so important that every child does that. And then once they've really deeply understood numbers to 3 decimal places, they should have a go at some calculations: addition, subtraction, multiplication, division, and they should also do some multiplication and division by 10 and 100. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you for the energy and enthusiasm you put into being a fabulous teacher who's going to create children who understand maths and can make sense of the world around them. If you'd like a list of all the videos I've published, here's the web address for the page that has that list and links to every single video. And if you'd like a list of the worksheets and where to find them, here's a link to that now. Please do share this information with your friends and colleagues. And I hope you'll join me again soon for another video. The next one in this series is on rounding decimal numbers. Hope you have a great day. Bye for now.